GMT, I just realized, yeah. So GMT, the moon is full just before midnight, but Brussels time, it's after midnight. So more like 20 to 1 in the morning. Not that we really care, but here we are. So the moon is full overnight tonight. Hopefully we'll all be sleeping. And but it's still already active the day before, the day after. The fullest phase of the moon usually lasts about 2 or 3 days. But astrologically speaking, there's a peak moment, and that peak moment is happening after midnight tonight for us here in Brussels, or if you're in continental Europe, and just before if you're in the UK. So you see the sun is here at 27, almost 28 degrees. So it's essentially 28 degrees of Cancer and Capricorn. And this axis, the Cancer-Capricorn axis, is one of the axes of, you can consider that to be like the family axis, if you like. Lots of emotion on the Cancer side, a lot of personal and psychological intensity on the Cancer side. It connects us very deeply to our mother, the Cancer energy. Cancer is very much about internalizing emotions and trying to process emotions in the way similar to what I described a moment ago with the radiation of the sun, the energy of the sun bouncing off the moon and coming back towards the earth overnight. So when the moon is full, nourishing the earth with the energy of the full moon. And in fact, many plants are benefit from the light of the moon rather than the light of the sun. That's where a lot of the most important growth happens, in the phase of the full moon in certain types of plants. And then we see where the sun is in Capricorn. Capricorn represents everything that's outside of the house, everything that's our outer life. It represents structure of society. It represents authority figures. And in a general sense, it's also the people. It represents workers, for example. Where, for example, Leo would represent the leader or the king, the important individual who's a leader. Capricorn would represent the government, representing collections of individuals that represent some kind of authority that can also be interpreted as banking or international multilateral institutions, and of course big government. So that tension is there between what we could consider to be what we personally desire, what we personally feel, and what we socially require, or what we socially feel obligated towards. And so every year around this time, when the Cancer moon comes up, can be quite an emotional time. The Cancer moon, depending on where it lands in your chart, as it's going through month by month, it will always affect all of your chart, but depending on particular points in your chart, you might feel yourself to be much more drawn towards emotionality, or a feeling of kind of withdrawal into your own deeper sort of psychological process. So for those of you who follow astrology, who want to keep abreast of this kind of thing, you can track where the moon is on any given day, because it'll take 2 and a bit days to go through each sign. And you can see how you're feeling as the moon is going through your chart, because it's not only it's not just an annual thing. This is happening all the time. But these full moons, the full moon in Cancer only happens once a year, sometimes very rarely twice if it's at the very beginning or the very end of the sign. But in this period of time, it's complicated a little bit by this presence, very close presence by Pluto right alongside the sun. So you can see Pluto and the sun are a degree away from each other, roughly, a little bit more, which is very, very close. And in fact, Sunday, just yesterday, they were exactly conjunct. And this happens once a year as well. So when Pluto, because Pluto moves so slowly, the sun keeps coming around and meeting Pluto over the last 12, 13 years it's been in Capricorn. So every time the sun is in Capricorn, it's going to at some point touch Pluto. And that will continue for the next 2 years. It'll continue to be the case. But now we're getting into a particularly significant time because Pluto is moving towards the end of Capricorn. And as a planet, especially slow-moving planet, moves towards the end of a sign, or when it enters into the beginning of a sign, we consider it to be quite destabilizing. And in this case, it also is destabilizing socially, in the sense that this particular full moon and Pluto right there is highlighting the United States, Pluto in the United States chart, what's known as the Sibley chart. So there's several charts for the United States, but the Pluto doesn't change because it moves so slowly. So the Pluto in the United States chart is at 27 degrees of Capricorn in the second house of money and finance and values. And so this Pluto and Sun together represents an enormous amount of transformation. It's like a peak point. It's a peak moment of intensity, especially because it's opposing the moon. In a mundane sense, the moon represents the people, and the sun would represent the power, the individual power, or the power of authority in any situation. That can also include the father, for example, in a natal chart. And Pluto, of course, represents transformation, intense transformation. Pluto represents secrets, everything that's hidden, anything. It signifies things that are buried, things that are not known about or a little bit taboo. It can be things that are literally underground, like Pluto represents oil, for example. It represents medicine and poison, as well as cures. Like they say, one man's poison is another man's medicine. And now connecting that with the sun and opposing the moon at the same time makes this period of time very intense. Now, the emotional intensity is one thing. I've certainly, most of the clients that I've seen this week and last week have been going through some really intense life experiences. I feel like I have as well. My kids, all my friends, the people that I'm talking to, are feeling like life has just reached a point of unbearable intensity. And this particular moment of time is crystallizing that this challenge between our emotional resilience, you could call it, or our capacity to absorb stress. And at one point, it just comes to breaking point. And that stress is that personal tension, either in the context of oneself and society, or within family, oneself within family, for example. And in some cases also, this will be with regards to relationship, and depending again on your individual chart, with important relationships in your life, but certainly within the context of family anyway. And society in general, there is tension. There's a breaking point. People are unable to just shake this off and move on, because the pressure has been so intense. So really important that we personally have a way of taking care of ourselves, nourishing ourselves both in the physical sense, through good food and sleep and all the things that we need, but also nourishing ourselves in a spiritual sense. And this is where then we can start to draw on Jupiter, which has moved into Pisces, which is creating a lovely energy of a more intense spiritual connection, more intense spiritual, natural spiritual response to life. The one challenge with that is that we also have Neptune in Pisces. It's not the only challenge, but it's one that stands out, because Neptune in Pisces is also in a very interesting sextile, what's called a sextile, to all the planets in Capricorn. So it's not very close. It's within 6 or 7 degrees each time. well, let's say 5 degrees from Pluto, 6 from the Sun, and about 7 plus from Venus. I'll get to Venus in a minute. And that energy can cause a kind of a pie in the sky kind of thinking. So it's a very harmonious energy, very synergistic. If we're really conscious of that, then it can be very spiritualizing. It can be very supportive. It can help us open out to new perspectives. Neptune can be a higher level of compassion. It can be a higher level of consciousness, allows us to see things from a lesser physical way or less material way, from a more energetic and spiritual sense. This can be very, very personally, I think, very rewarding, but socially, and often in mundane astrology, we have to kind of look at the more tending towards the more negative qualities of things, because we are dealing with sort of the common denominator of society. So this can have an influence that leads to a lot of deception. What can be spoken about might be misunderstood, maybe with the best of intentions, not correctly understood, or it can be outright deception. That can also be this kind of over optimistic thinking, or thinking that is delusional, straight up delusional. And again, it can be deliberate, or it can be by mistake, by accident, by not being sure. And that same Neptune, all of this is happening at the same time as this moon is trining the moon, and we can ignore for the moment the midheavens, the ascendant, and so on, because this is only relevant for Brussels. That won't be relevant if you don't live in Brussels. The ascendant will change. But just ignore that, because the placements of the planets are more important. So this energy of trining between Neptune and the moon emphasizes that quality of potential for real spiritual awakening, or real spiritual, I would like to say, guidance that we can draw on as individuals, that allows us to feel more directly from a sense of being guided by our intuition, or if you like to think of it as other beings or other energies that you can connect to, that's helping you move your way through this moment in time. That's your instinct and your connection to what is greater and not as tangible as what we're used to on a day-to-day level, is actually going to be a quality that offers a lot of support going forward. That's very harmonious. Again, on a conscious individual level, this can be fantastic. Very, very good energy. And I would say that this applies the whole week. We really want to as I said, the full moon is an event, but this energy is it's occurring over an unfolding of time. And certainly this full moon will then start to wane over the next 2 weeks. And so we're still looking at another 2-week period where this energy is still going to be in influence. So just watch out for that Neptune on a collective level, and especially wherever it might be for you in your chart. Like for me, for example, in my birth chart, Neptune is on my natal Chiron. And Neptune on Chiron is an influence of illness. And 3 weeks ago, I had COVID, and I'm still quite tired from it. I'm not at all unwell, just not well in the sense of being completely back to normal, just tired. And so that energy of Neptune can also weaken our connection to our drive and finding energy as well, depending on where it is in your chart. Chiron is also about healing, also about issues around sabotage, self-sabotage. So I'll look into different ways as well where I might be doing that to myself. Neptune is also about withdrawing, and that's a little bit of this theme of the moon in Cancer, which is pulling back from the world. So it can be retreating wisely, retreating emotionally, or retreating actually, physically from things that are too much of necessity, or it can be avoidance. So this is something to watch out for, being socially avoidant, or being emotionally avoidant, or being avoidant in terms of responsibility, where the opposite is Capricorn, which is always taking responsibility, taking it sometimes in areas where others would actually be better taking responsibility, to that point where there's almost a compulsion to organize and take responsibility for what's going on. That can lead to this kind of authoritarian energy. And we definitely are seeing that socially, but we can also perhaps see that in our private lives. So again, that message there between the moon and Neptune could be, where in your life are you consciously backing away, slowing yourself down to take care of yourself, to connect to a sense of higher self and higher purpose with life? And where might you be avoiding things? Where might you be avoiding what's important for you? In my case as well, the moon happens to be about a degree and a bit away from my ascendant. So I'm grappling with this question myself. It's like, to what extent am I actually acting properly in my life experience right now, or am I avoiding certain things? Should I be slowing things down, or should I be doing more? This is it's a question that only individuals can answer. And then I want to come back over this way to look at Mars here before we finish up with this little triad. Mars is in a square aspect, in this case, to Neptune. And when Mars, because it's representing action and where it is that we want to we want to be active and do something. And of course, in Sagittarius, that's all about what we believe in and how we believe we should be acting, and also potentially even telling others what to believe and telling others how to act. That's Mars in Sagittarius can be quite bossy in that way. This is going to be a challenge, because now Neptune might be clouding our judgment as to what action to take. And again, that can be collective as well as individual. So always kind of listen to what I'm saying here in terms of our experience as a collective, as well as what's going on in your lives. And you'll get more details by knowing where in your chart you'll find the signs. And so Neptune being in Pisces, look for Pisces there. Look for Sagittarius where Mars is. Where is Mars activating your chart? Where is it trying to act? Is it the appropriate action, or are you acting based on information that might not be very clear at this point? Mars is soon going to be out of that influence, and because soon Mars will go into Capricorn, where it functions very, very well and where it won't be disturbed by Neptune. But let's say at least for the rest of this week, it's a good idea to get a measure of why you're acting in the way that you are, or why you're choosing certain things. And then later you'll find that sometimes the slowing down that may have happened through the effects of the moon and Neptune, or the extra potentially spiritualizing effect, may have been beneficial. Or if you're in any doubt, good to get advice. Ask for other people, third parties, neutral third parties that don't have any skin in the game. Ask them, do you think this is the right thing for me to do right now? Or am I not seeing things clearly? So just bouncing ideas off of people around you can be very, very helpful with that. So if I come back to our little Venus in Capricorn, she plays a role in this full moon by sign, not so much by conjunction. So she's not really close enough that we could really say this is important, because the moon moves very quickly and the fullness of the moon is very quick. And so that's not as interesting as, for example, a slow moving planet would be. But at the same time, Venus is in Capricorn and she's retrograde until the 29th of January. She went retrograde on the 18th of December. So it's been a while already. And she'll go all the way back to 11 degrees and then move all the way from the 29th of January all the way forward and out of Capricorn by the 6th of March. But by that time, Mars will be back in Capricorn. And so there's a lot of energy that continues the theme of this full moon. So there's a lot of energy that is still going to be pumping up the energy of Capricorn. And at the same time, now you notice since last Friday, the 14th, Mercury has moved retrograde. And for those of you who follow, these retrogrades are not as big a deal as often are indicated, especially on social media by non-astrologers. It's literally, it's not a big deal. What a retrograde planet does is it is stronger, because the apparent motion of retrograde actually happens when a planet is closer to Earth, even if it's obviously very far away, but when it appears to be moving backwards, but that's because it's at the closest point towards in its orbit of our solar system, and it's at its closest point to Earth. And so that makes it very strong, it makes it very impactful. It sometimes means that things are not going to work out the way that we envisage them, but I mean, literally, when do they? And but don't get worried, don't freak out about retrograde planets. They often are a useful thing to observe in terms of, especially where they are in your chart, where you might be able to put more attention, where more of your energy or your drive or your attention is required. Mercury goes retrograde 3 times a year, and that is such a frequent occurrence that it's not that significant, although it can require a little bit of more concentrated energy around communication, for example. It represents contracts as well, business dealings and things like that. So it can be a very good thing to pay close attention to that. And also, if you have a lot of Virgo energy or a lot of Gemini energy, sun, moon, or rising, then Mercury rules that. And so Mercury is important for you. More significant is the Venus retrograde, because it's more rare. And Venus goes retrograde every 18 months or so. And in this case, this Venus could represent, for example, because of course she's back and forth over Pluto. This Venus can have us really reflecting on issues of good governance, issues of government in general. Venus represents relationships and values, what we value, all the things we like, beauty as well. So especially on a personal level, Venus represents the female energy, feminine energy. It's not about the gender. It's about the energy within each of us. We each have a Martian and a Venusian energy. So that's the softer, more receptive energy that is Venus. And so what can very likely be is that there's a collective need for us to reflect on all these issues around money, values, finances, and so on. And I think that's being reinforced by the nodes, but I will get to that in a minute, because that's going to be a bit of a focal point tonight. But Venus on a personal level also can have us reflecting on what's going on in our relationships. Even if you don't have a relationship, it's also that. It's like what's going on, what do I need? And this comes back to the moon in Cancer, which is really very much about an emotional need, which again, I'll make reference once again to the nodes to help understand how that's being triggered also by the nodes. But what is it that we need and value in relationship? What needs to change? When Venus goes retrograde, it can be helpful to examine, how do I do relationship? What needs to change? What do I want going forward? Whether it be in this particular relationship or in general in relationships, or is it something from the past that you're becoming aware of? And so it's very interesting from the point of view of the past to explore from December 2013 to January 2014, where Venus was retrograde previously in Capricorn. And so this is a cycle that happens every 8 years. And so you get Venus coming back to the same place to do these retrogrades in a rhythm, and it's a cyclical rhythm. Some of you may have seen this pattern of a flower that she creates a kind of a star-shaped or a flower-shaped design in the sky based on this movement of retrograde and the dynamic between the sun and the earth and Venus. If you're not familiar with that and you'd like to see it, just send me a message and I'll send you a little GIF that shows you what the movement is. It's quite pretty. That movement is repeated in cycles that go on roughly 8 years. And so if you look back, December 2013, January 2014, and start to understand issues in relationship. And again, that can be with money. It can be financial issues. It can be issues around self-worth. And of course, issues in actual relationship, what was going on, and how that might be reflected today. How is that affecting you, let's say, between 5th of November of last year and the 6th of March of this year? What's going on in your life around this time that might feel similar? Or, where could you learn some lessons and realize that there's some pattern of behavior that keeps coming back, something that keeps reemerging, and that could be where the healing can happen. And again, with this Neptune, I don't want to paint Neptune in a bad light, but this Neptune in Pisces, for example, is a very strong message, especially along with Jupiter in Pisces, a very strong message of spiritual healing, of healing from the highest possible understanding of life. And I think that's probably what's going to get us through this really difficult time, collectively and individually. Is this constant reminder of who we really are, constant attention on our spiritual nature and not letting ourselves get bogged down with the intensity of the worldly situation. Let me just see now if there was anything else I wanted to say. By the way, you're welcome to stop and ask questions if there's anything that jumps out at you, but otherwise I'm going to keep going. The other thing to reflect on is that the lunar cycle happens in different layers, and one of the layers of the cycle is the full moon that we get annually, or usually annually, is the fullest feature of the moon that started as a new moon in that sign. So where the moon is now full in, the sun is in opposition to the moon in Cancer. That means the full moon is in Cancer. In July of 2021, there was a new moon there. And so again, if you come back to especially where Cancer is in your chart, but what it was that was going on in July with regards to self-care and nurturance and nourishment of all kinds, looking after yourself, your family, emotional health, psychological health. Well, I'm not sure if I mentioned this, but the Cancer also represents our deeper psychology. It represents our sense of security, what makes us feel safe. And that doesn't necessarily mean money, and it doesn't necessarily mean, literal security. It's like, what do I need to feel safe in this world? For some people, that's going to be like a roof over my head and fresh drinking water. And for other people, it's going to be much more elaborate depending on their own psychology. But the issue of security and safety is directly linked, psychologically linked to our relationship with our earliest relationship with our mother, for good or bad. And so that can also be reflected in this process, what was going on in July and then what's going on now that is being highlighted. That is something of a symbol around, your capacity to feel safe and okay in this world, and can you manage, do you feel emotionally resilient? It's a tragic truth that especially in the last 2 years, but already it had been developing really for the last decade or more. I would even say literally since Pluto moved into Capricorn, which was 2008, that especially young people are not well equipped psychologically to handle adversity. In previous generations, it was just a given. The adversity was a given, and it was just, stuff happened, and there were wars and people died and there was illness and all these things. And in the last, let's say 30 years to go back, people are being born since the 90s into a world where they didn't really know hardship in most countries. Of course, there have been many countries at war, alas, but let's say excluding war, in countries that were in a relatively stable peacetime situation, there was very little that was causing any upset. And so people have become accustomed to getting what they want all the time, to having things their way, to having things work out for them. And certainly the last 2 or so years, but even certainly the last decade, I think, has shown that that is falling apart, and that even for the rich countries that have been otherwise quite spoiled in the last few decades, things are falling apart and things are not working the way that that we've come to expect them to work. And that brings me now to Uranus. Uranus went into Taurus first in May of 2018, and then it left in November of 2018, and then it went back into Taurus in April of 2019, May of 2019, where it's been ever since. And it's going to stay there until 2025. It leaves briefly, then it comes back in 2026, but it's finally gone from Taurus as of 2026. So we've got a few more years. We're not quite halfway through this phase of Uranus moving into Taurus. And that represents a massive change to everything that we thought we could rely on. So Taurus represents all of the things that support us. It represents food and, again, finances. Remember, Taurus is ruled by Venus. Represents money systems. It represents food availability, resources, agriculture, what's that called? The chain of supply chains, whether it be for food or any other product. The Taurus is also our physical body, our physical health. It's on the health axis. This Taurus and Scorpio axis is the health axis, with Taurus being the body, the physical health, and Scorpio being deeper psychological health, mental health. And just in the same way that Pisces and Virgo are also in a health axis. So in slightly different ways. But so Uranus being in Taurus has been an enormous disruption to all of that, to our financial systems, to our sense of what we thought was reliable. And it's complicated by the fact that for several years, from 2011 until 2016, Uranus and Pluto were squaring each other as Uranus went through Aries. And that was where we really started to see everything shake up. And there was a challenge between what was the individual desire, what was the desire for change, and what was the collective need. And so we have this situation where we're going through unprecedented change with a large part of the population that is not really psychologically equipped to handle adversity, handle change. And so one of our most pressing, I think, needs or emergencies right now is caring for children, caring for young people. Obviously caring for everyone, but caring especially for young people who are particularly vulnerable in a developmental stage to destabilization. And this is, I think, something that's going to become more important. If I just move forward now a couple of days, we're seeing that all of a sudden now, as of Wednesday, the nodes, the North Node Rahu, what is called Rahu, is moving into Taurus as well. So moving out of Gemini, the Gemini Sagittarius axis, where it's been since May of 2020, and it's moving into the Taurus and Scorpio axis. This throws two spanners in the works because Uranus is the planet of revolution and instability and things changing rapidly in surprising ways. It's a planet which can disrupt things, not necessarily for the bad. It also can be innovation. It can be, scientific discoveries. It could be rapid change that resolves problems. It's not all mess. It can be extremely rapid inventions, rapid interventions. On a personal level, it can be where you might experience a sense of nothing's ever going to change, and then boom, it changes. Something is like something that didn't feel like it was even possible happens, and then suddenly you're in a completely different situation. Again, look for where Taurus is in your chart to see where all that energy is. But the reason that this is significant, particularly this week, and also symbolized by this moon, this full moon energy, which I've described now, is that Uranus, if I'll go back again, so tomorrow, Uranus, you see this red, means that it's retrograde. And it's stationing to go direct. It takes a few days for these slower moving planets. It takes a few days. It's not like a quick process. Mercury tends to take about a day to shift, but these slower moving planets take several days. And so watch what happens here. Just in one day now, it's going direct. And so although it's not making much progress, now it's moving gradually forward at the same time as the North Node moves into this place. And Rahu, the North Node, has a synergy or a similar energy to Uranus in the sense that it's a disruptive energy. It brings something new and different and expansive and potentially surprising, that something you couldn't have predicted as well. It puts an enormous amount of focus on that part of the chart. So again, collectively putting a lot of focus now on all of the issues around covered by Taurus, which is again farming and food security, food chains, supply chains, our finance system, money systems, all these different things that actually we've come to think of as totally reliable. Like, when we, particularly in the sort of West, so-called developed countries, we go to the grocery store and it just doesn't occur to us that we won't find what we need. It just does not occur to us. There are a few countries around Europe where that's always been a bit of a question. But for the most part, you're going to go to the grocery store and you'll get what you need. Now, that's not the case anymore. In so-called advanced countries, you have real disruption in supply chains for various reasons, not all for the same reasons. And people are starting to become aware of this vulnerability, aware of this fact that now things are not as stable as they once were. Now, with Rahu going in there, the North Node going in there, that's going to magnify that effect, that disruptive effect. So look for where Taurus is in your chart, and you'll see that that's going to be where you're now expanding and shifting and making changes in your life. So, for example, this is going to affect people, obviously, who are Taurus or Scorpio in a very big way, because what's happening then where the South Node is, it's always polar opposite. The South Node is representing what we're either less interested in, or what we're ready to surrender, or what we have to surrender, what is going to be taken away from us. So again, if you look in the house of where Scorpio is, then you'll see there's now a pattern of letting go, shedding. Something is gone, something you're giving up. The last time that this energy moved through these houses was in 2003. Do I have my dates? It's from 2003, which I think it was something like April or June of 2003 until the end of 2004. And in fact, it was Boxing Day of 2004 because it was on that day when the nodes shifted out of this axis that there was this massive tsunami, and that decimated quite a few different countries in Asia, particularly Thailand and countries like that. And so, not to say that that's going to happen. However, in that Taurus axis and Scorpio axis, the theme is very much earth and water. It's very much land and what's happening on the land and what's going on in the earth. And Uranus and Rahu in the sign of Taurus can be very destabilizing. Already Uranus symbolizes things like earthquakes, lightning strikes, volcanic eruptions, and so on. That's a standard sort of feature. Depending on how it's configured with other planets, it'll be triggered in that way. And then the South Node in Scorpio is representing the water. It represents the seas. It represents deep water. And so, this could be something again to do with our situation around pollution and so on. For the moment, Scorpio itself is actually in a relatively favorable situation for now. Most of the disruption is tending to be around other signs. However, Saturn is going to be squaring Scorpio by sign through so it'll be at a certain point, probably around, I'm going to say probably around the spring, late spring, Saturn will square the South Node, and something there will probably be triggering some kind of intense experience, some kind of intense development. But that'll be for another session. And then, of course, the question is, when will they meet? So they won't meet until August. So the North Node and Uranus will come together gradually as notice that the nodes move backwards slowly through the chart. As Uranus moves forward, they will meet each other. I think it's somewhere around the 10th of August, something like that. Again, for another time, because this is enough to cover today, I think. So with the nodal change, it's something that is, like I said, it's something that happens very rarely. It happens from 2003, 2004. So go back in time in your life, but also collectively to 2003 and 2004, and look at what was going on, what was the situation there. That also coincides just after the US invasion of Iraq, and then of course implanting itself in Iraq. The idea was that the mission was supposed to be accomplished after 3 weeks or something, and then of course that was many years. Still military operations going on there. So these triggers are, especially when the signs change, are quite important. So take notes this week, or at least be very observant this week as to what's happening, because it's a very interesting week in terms of new energies, new things changing in a slightly longer range. This nodal axis change is quite rare. And so then if we move forward again, because we're not quite done, we see that now we've got on, it's on Thursday. Let's just go back a few hours just to get it right. So on Thursday evening, the sun will move into Aquarius. So if we go right back, so you can again ignore the house placements. That's just where because the rising sign keeps shifting, it's shifting things around. So the sun, there we go. So the sun now on Thursday at 3 in the morning. So 3:40 Brussels time, 3:42 basically Brussels time. Now the sun will go into 0 degrees of Aquarius. And this changes the energy considerably, and that's for another month. So from the 20th of January into roughly the 20th of February. So this changes the energy again, because now we're starting to emphasize the energy that is already in Aquarius, where we find Mercury, which is retrograde, and Saturn. And so this is again a message. Aquarius represents the collective. It represents associations and groups of people. And this is another emphasis. This month ahead of us is going to be, again, a strong emphasis on what is going on in our collective experience. That will be something that will be more noticeable when the sun actually bumps into the retrograde, or I guess it's more Mercury bumping into the sun by retrograde, which is going to be on the 23rd. So that's next Sunday. And then as the sun keeps going on its merry way, it's also going to join up with Saturn. But there, we've just passed by it. Let's have a look again. So we have the February 1st new moon. It's not exactly by degree. I won't worry about the degree sign, but the new moon of February 1st is also conjoined Saturn. And so that re-emphasizes this issue of what is necessary in terms of restructuring our collective experience. And you can go into your chart and look where Aquarius is and think, where in my life do I need to stabilize or restructure what is going on in that area of my life, and represented by Aquarius. Because the conjunction between Saturn, the sun, and the moon is really very much speaking to this need for taking responsibility, need for being serious, need for becoming your own authority. This happens to coincide with the transition back into Capricorn of Mercury, which will then be conjunct Pluto at the new moon, which again is signifying similar things to what this full moon has been telling us, which is very much around Plutonian issues. So even the word Pluto is, it's about power, it's about influence. It's the notion of plutocrats, as people who have absolute power, who have massive amounts of money. Those are significant players now in our world in a way that has outstripped all understanding of even wealth. People, there are some 100 individuals in the world who have more wealth than anyone could ever conceive of, let alone spend in one lifetime. And this has become increasingly so in the last 2 years during this COVID crisis. So the message keeps getting repeated that there's something that's coming up around these issues that are putting a lot of pressure on our social structures, and therefore obviously in our own psyche. Even if we think, okay, I'm not going to watch the news, I'm not interested in that, I'm not going to go there, it definitely has an effect on us. And we have to recognize that we don't need to protect ourselves from that in any sense, but we have to recognize that we are always participating in life fully, whether we are consciously choosing to do so or not. So far better to be conscious about really where we put our energy and our attention, rather than imagining that doesn't concern me, it's not part of my life, where in fact it always is. It's going to be influencing you. So this can be the deception of Neptune as well, this kind of sense, this false sense that that's not my problem. Those people live halfway around the world. There is no other. There is literally no other. We are all in this big soup together, and we cannot escape that. And thankfully so, that's the way that we are. And so once we really, really understand and respect that, we'll actually live much more in harmony in our own lives, within ourselves as well. So definitely something to look out for. I just want you to notice one thing here too, which is that at this point now Mars is starting to chase Venus. Now remember, Venus is going to be in Capricorn until the 6th of March. But watch, if I just keep scooting forward, just watching now Mars and Venus together here. And you'll see that they never leave each other's side now for weeks on end. We've got Mars and Venus coming together And there they're going to, of course, knock into Pluto as well. So if we look around the beginning of March, the first week of March, last week of February is going to be quite interesting, quite intense in that sense, because once again, there'll be this trigger, this kind of passion, this ignition of some kind of interest around, again, collectively, possibly to do with finances, money. Can be also literally the battle of the sexes, because this 27-degree point, again, is the Pluto of the United States. Now, there's a lot of debate around women's rights. There's debate around voting rights, which incidentally they have been debating during the peak of Mercury retrograde as it turned retrograde. Never a good idea. So it's definitely not going to work. So just to notice this around the first week of March, very, very interesting, significant power. Look in your chart where you find Capricorn, Aquarius, and Pisces to see how much things are actually going to be influencing your life, because there's a phenomenal amount of energy. We'll come back to that at another time, but that is there's actually a new moon on the 2nd of March, which happens to be my birthday. So there's a new moon on my birthday. So it's a pretty exciting year all around for me, although I have no idea what that will look like. But anyway, coming back to this point, this 27-degree, this is so significant because where a country has its Pluto return, it's, by the way, only about every 250 years, 248 or so years. And that is where things necessarily have to be broken down and rebuilt. Something has to transform. That is not a small change. It's not a small tweaking. It's something that is massively going to transform. If you look again, if you observe the American chart, it's the second house again, which represents all of those issues that are represented or signified by Venus and Taurus, about money, about values, about food, about also even issues around family. Taurus also touches on themes of family. Very important what is going on in the States, because of course it reflects how the rest of the world is today. We cannot escape what is going on in the United States. That has been an impossibility for decades already, but especially so now, as the world has become increasingly integrated. So what is going on in the States is going to be in patches at least mirrored around the world, and there's going to be massive transformation in terms of human rights, constitutional rights, voting rights, money, how money is kept, how money is taken care of. Money is, again, like I said, signified by Taurus. Bitcoin and all of those similar kinds of things are going to be a huge phenomenon in the next year and a half. And I wonder if this North Node meeting Uranus in August is going to have some kind of impact on Bitcoin. If you're one of these people who invests in this cryptocurrency, I would be interested to see what's going on in August, because that will be some peak moment of who knows what, because it's absolutely unpredictable what goes on when Uranus meets Rahu, which, by the way, again, is only every 18 years. So quite significant. A lot of really interesting things happening this spring. I'm going to leave it there and see if you have any questions. If any of you want to ask questions based on your own chart or based on what I've said. And in the meantime, I'll just double check my notes to see if I've forgotten anything. Yeah, I had made a note to myself for this week in particular, given a lot of the things that I've said, that if you're so inclined to do that kind of internal work or that more sort of spiritual work, this is the week to really ask for guidance, ask for signs and inspiration, ask to be shown. You know, when whether you believe in all of these things or not, at least from the point of view of our own unconscious process, if you open up a question without trying to answer the question, you just open yourself up to a question, you've changed something in the way that your mind is now looking at things. And so opening up the question, saying something like, I wonder how I'm going to get that money. Or, rather than saying, oh my God, I need money, the question is, I wonder how that money is going to come to me. And so, you ask these questions in this way, which opens up an attitude of receptivity, very Cancerian energy, receptivity. Very Taurian as well, Taurus energy, and in working in that way, and for some of you might want to also connect with spirit guides or divinities of some sort, or ancestral connections, or whatever practices you work with, whatever works for you. Basically, this is the week to really put some time into doing that, because it's an extraordinary week. One thing I didn't show you, which I think I might just pop up quickly. You see this rectangle here? I'm just tracing it now with the cursor. There's a blue rectangle at the time of this full moon, which is quite unusual. It's an unusual pattern. If I see that in a chart, it's quite a phenomenal pattern that often shows somebody who's quite spiritually powerful, is quite spiritually aware, and that is this connection between the moon, the nodes, the sun and Pluto together, and so the north node and the south node. So that means that there's a trine and a sextile and another trine and a sextile, very harmonious, very flowing energy. And that by definition also contains an opposition. So you see this big opposition because that's the moon opposing the sun and Pluto there at the same time. This is called a mystic rectangle, something really interesting energetically that is available to us this week. And so I wish you, a great week processing that. So Alicia is asking, I'm a Capricorn sun, Aries moon, and Libra rising. Any tips for this full moon? Yeah, there we are. So we've got a Libra rising, the full moon, and then Libra rising in the chart. So let's imagine that this is an individual's chart. So we see Libra is cardinal, the sun is cardinal, and of course Pluto and Venus are also in cardinal signs, and the moon is cardinal. And then we haven't talked about it, but we also have Chiron over here. I won't go into that right now. So there's a lot of cardinal energy, very strong, very powerful influence for activating, for taking to act. Cardinality is about initiating energy. It's about actually doing something. I actually wrote a note to myself that reminds me something about that somewhere, about this cardinality, which is actually giving us this impetus that we must take action on. So again, this is one of our problems, that especially if we delve back into this kind of Neptunian energy, we wait, and then we wait for something to happen to us, and particularly the energy of Cancer, Pisces, Taurus. It's all very let's wait and see, let's be friends, let's make this look nice. And so we need this energy that stimulates change. It's not going to be sufficient to step back and wait and see. You will have to take action, especially, as I mentioned, over the next couple of weeks, especially in the areas of your chart which are reflecting Capricorn, Aquarius, and Pisces. Very, very important aspects of your life. And then, of course, we have to add in the axis of Taurus and Scorpio. So there's an urgent need for you to do something in your life around the energy of that. Capricorn sun is means that your birthday is sometime around this time of the year. And so you're already like that. You're already somebody who probably takes initiative and wants to take responsibility for things. But this is going to be now with regards to how do I feel about things. And so another one Teresa says, I'm Cancer with Libra ascendant, so we've got another Libra rising. And so Cancer, Cancer is really one of the things that's under a lot of pressure. Aries, just to come back to Alicia briefly, Aries moon can also be feeling pressure by the square impact of this energy of the sun. You see that red line, it's actually squaring all the energy in Aries. And that could also be influenced by Chiron. It depends on the degree of the moon. But that feels like a lot of emotional, psychological tension that also applies to Cancer, because whatever is going on in Cancer is being opposed by Pluto, and that has been for years, and then just currently opposed by the sun. The sun in opposition is not necessarily a bad thing. It's spotlighting energy. It's like it's showing us something about ourselves, especially if it's the moon, for example. But if it's the sun in Cancer, I think this is certainly the last couple of years have been a lot of pressure. I mean, actually, the cardinal signs have had a lot of pressure, a lot of challenges for years and years already, because of this Pluto moving into Capricorn. So the cardinal signs, especially in that period between 2011 and 2016, really strongly, when Uranus was also in Aries, which is another cardinal sign, there was an immense amount of pressure for change and disruption. That means for Cancer, for Aries, for Capricorn, and for Libra, in whichever configuration you find it, sun, moon, or rising. And so right now, where the pressure is emotional. And so the question can be, where am I emotionally, in terms of emotional maturity, emotional honesty? We also have to be aware that there can be a tendency to victimize oneself, and that energy is, but all the water signs can tend to in the shadow side, can tend to victimize themselves. There can be emotional manipulation or whatever, emotional incomprehension or lack of clarity. So it's very important also to explore where we need to take more responsibility, where we are responsible emotionally for what's going on, or psychologically for what's going on, and not always expecting that it's the other who is the problem. That's, of course, not easy. Nobody likes to feel that they're the problem, but it's worth exploring, and particularly this week, where this tension is really pronounced right now. I wish you all the very best in terms of going forward with certainly this year and a half ahead, which is going to be very stimulating, very challenging in the material sense. I think financially, people who are feeling the pinch, or people who are a little bit financially vulnerable, will be dealing with that, both the material side of things as well as the psychological and emotional side of things in an intense way. Because of that axis between Taurus and Scorpio is challenging to both, and depends on where you are on that spectrum. But the solution is in that higher picture of life. Higher is not a good word. Let's call it the less material way of looking at life, and recognizing that change is a natural phenomenon. That since we began this session, we've all transformed trillions of cells in our body. Change is the way it is. This is the life blood of everything is based on our capacity to transform. So it's inherent to us. It's not like we can't do this. So the thing that resists change is the mind. And so we have to overcome that idea, or this habit, or this fear that says, I want things to look one way. I want things to be this way and stay this way. And open yourself up, and particularly if this is the energy of the North Node, Rahu, and Uranus, which are connecting this year, open yourself up to things that you couldn't possibly have imagined, and just stay available for things to look different and to be guided. Allow yourself to be quiet inside and not try always, and that can be one of the challenges with the cardinal signs, is that they're always trying to figure things out and change, especially the Capricorn energy. Like, I've got this, I'm going to control this thing to, wrestle it to the ground. And it's just not the way the world works. It's not the way life is. So the more that we can just surrender to all that and just say, well, okay, this is what this moment feels like. It's not a description of my whole being. It's not a description of the full picture. And so that's the positive energy of Neptune and Jupiter in Pisces that brings us a more natural, sort of an easeful way of connecting spiritually to life. And that can be, connecting spiritually to other forms of life, animals, nature, realizing our utter dependence on nature. The fact that we, for centuries, have abused nature and used it as a consumer item. And we're now really very, very vulnerable as a result of that. And so how in our individual way and then collectively can we pull back from that and change our behavior and move forward in a different way that's coming from a place of hope. Never lose hope. It's good to have a healthy realism, but you must always hold on to hope, because hope is not irrational. Hope is just the recognition that everything changes, that is that logical sequence of life itself, constantly in flux. We're not necessarily observing it. We're not able to necessarily break it down and see what's changing, but we see over time the results are there. So we keep our mental and emotional attitude healthy in that sense of open to hope, open to things being good, in the way that we can, even if it's in a small little patch of our world. And never lose hope, because you will lose your creativity and you will lose your connection to yourself if you lose hope. So regardless of the outer form of all of the things that are going on in the world now, recognize that there's something beyond that that's much more important, and keep tapping into that in whatever way works for you. So thank you, everybody, for being here. Thank you to those of you who are listening on the recording. And I hope you have a really good full moon week and a great transformation into the nodes of Taurus and Scorpio.